Limerence by devdevlin. Read by Ella Max Mabella. 3. Miss Granger surprises him. He expects her to crumble. He expects her to shy away from the rest of the school, to hide in her dormitory, to spend the next week, maybe 2, deteriorating in the hospital wing. She has become a witness to murder. To most, he believes that it would be a somewhat disconcerting experience. What he does not expect is for her to arrive bright and early the very next morning at the school's emergency assembly, a horde of small first years in tow. But that is exactly what she does. He supposes that she is a Gryffindor. While the head may be loud and obnoxious and a terrible composer of short songs, he knows that it is very rarely incorrect in its judgment. Only a few steps into the hall, and he is sure she has noticed him. He is seated 3 places down from the headmaster himself at the front of the hall. She must have noticed him. But if she has, she shows no outward sign of it. And it is only once the first-year students are all seated tightly toward the front of the hall, and she is at the end of the table in the place of the head girl, that she meets his eyes. Her features are blank, impassive. But her eyes... The corner of his mouth twists upward, and it is that, he thinks, that is what drives her to look away. And then Dumbledore begins his address, and her eyes remain on the table the entire time. A student had been found dead, and naturally, security in the castle had been immediately increased to the highest of levels. There were talks of closing the school, and all of the students who remained were now under the strictest of curfews. There was to be no movement of a soul under the age of 18 without the escort of a teacher. Miss Granger, he knows, is not one for breaking the rules. While she may spend her social hours with 2 of the most notorious rule-breakers in current enrollment of the school, Miss Granger is not cut of the same fabric. She prides herself on being good and headstrong and righteous, and yet it is of no surprise to him that night, the very next night, he finds her alone in the corner of the library, studying by wandlight. Miss Granger? She stiffens, but she doesn't look away from her book. He can see in the dim light provided by her wand her throat moving as she swallows. It is almost as if she believes if she does not acknowledge him, he will go away. It is almost laughable. "It is past curfew," he says. She responds in silence and continues to read, and Tom's fingertips start to feel like they are heating up. "Miss Granger." "You wanted my silence," she says, and though it is a whisper, it is somehow solid. "Have it." And there it is. Inside of her eyes, brown, the color of mud, bright and dark at the same time, is the very same feeling he'd seen at the end of her wand. It's unmissable, and his skin is heating, and his collar feels too tight. "You, of all, should know that it isn't safe to be alone in the castle," he says, and it is forced, it is rehearsed, it is exactly what he has been instructed to say should he find a student breaking curfew. "I'm not alone, though, am I?" she says, and with it, his collar is tighter, too tight, too tight. "You're here." The nerve of her, the nerve of her, and she is... He steps closer. "What are you reading?" She swallows again, but she doesn't hesitate. "I'm reading about unbreakable vows." He runs his tongue along his teeth, and then he smiles sadly. "You won't find it." Excuse me?" "What you're looking for," he says, stepping closer again, and now at last her book is down and she is retreating. "That is what you're looking for, isn't it? How to break one." She blinks quickly and only stops retreating when her back hits the row of shelves. "You won't find it." He's close enough now that even in the shadowed light he can see her eyelashes. "Go back to bed, Miss Granger." She's trembling now. He can see it. She is like a leaf. But then, You won't get away with it, she whispers, and his breath hitches. Professor Dumbledore will figure it out, even without me. Oh, she has surprised him again. Stubborn, strong-willed, extraordinary Miss Granger. He looks over her features, her nose, her lips, though he did not consciously intend to do so. It is also not conscious when he draws his fingers to her cheek to brush the hair from it. If I were you, Miss Granger. His mouth feels strangely dry, and he is the one swallowing now. I would sincerely hope that he doesn't. She leaves then. She leaves at a speed that is very close to a run, and Tom, he stays there in the corner of the library for hours. 4. Tom doesn't enjoy teaching. 6 years he's been doing it now, and with each one that passes, he feels his patience for it withering away, wearing thinner and thinner. That isn't to say he doesn't enjoy the magic. He does. And it isn't to say he doesn't enjoy the castle. He undoubtedly does. What he doesn't enjoy is the students. They're ignorant, naive, slow, and tiresome, and if it were up to him, many of them wouldn't have stepped foot in Hogwarts to begin with, let alone have made it all the way to 7th year. Miss Granger included. But that day, the first day of classes, after Warren was found dead, and 1 week after having found Miss Granger in the library reading about unbreakable vows, Tom is itching with excitement as the students file in. He has a unique lesson planned for today, and it is for her. He is sure she won't enjoy it. When we think of the dark arts, he begins loudly, dramatically, and the murmuring class falls silent. We typically think of the extremes. Humans are selfish creatures, and as such it is only natural that when we think of the dark arts, our minds instinctively edge towards poisons, torture, murder, magic that we perceive as being directly dangerous to our own well-being. He paces when he speaks, and though he isn't facing her, he can feel that she is watching him. But what we don't typically consider when we think of dark arts is the inherent power of our own words. He faces the class then. Does anyone have an idea of a way by which our words alone may classify as dark arts? He scans the class, and when he reaches the front, he sees that for once Miss Granger does not have her hand up. But what she does have is fire in her eyes. He licks his lips. Nobody. He follows up, watching her pointedly. Not even you, Miss Granger. A few students in green laugh. No, sir, she says, and her voice is tight. No, I don't think I have a single idea of what you could possibly mean. That's a shame. He doesn't lift her eyes from hers. I was so looking forward to your opinion this time. He looks away, then to survey the class, but before he does, he notices that her knuckles are white around her quill. I'll try again, shall I? Would anyone be kind enough to provide me with an example of a magically binding contract? This time, in response to this question, there are several hands in the air, and he doesn't need to call on any of them before one speaks out of turn. A marriage contract, sir? He nods. Correct, Mr. Malfoy. I have 2 points to Slytherin. The chalk hovering in front of the board curls around the words marriage vows. In certain pure-blooded circles, the vows one makes in his or her wedding day are often not only legally binding, but also magically. But generally speaking, marriage vows would not constitute as dark magic. Anything else? A more timid hand shoots up.
Sporting competition, sir?
Ah, yes, also correct. Well done, Miss Parkinson. Have another 2 points. He says, and she, like Miss Granger would have done only days ago, smiles as her cheeks redden. Many competitions, such as the Triwizard Tournament and the Quidditch World Cup, utilize magically binding contracts in their entrance conditions. But yet again, not dark, not dark. He waits until the chalk finishes its writing before he again watches the class expectantly and sees no further hands in the air. "There is another branch of contract that we are missing from our short list," he says, and he glances over to see that though Granger's skin is now furiously pink, her mouth is firmly clenched shut. "An important one. The one that I would like to focus the rest of today's discussion on. Any ideas?" The class is quiet. "Anyone? There's even a hint for you in plain sight upon the board." When still none of his students speak, he smiles. "Vows," he eventually answers himself, "come in many varieties, many other than marriage vows." He slowly crosses the room and leans against his desk. "These can be innocent enough, ones made through simple oversights in our words, and might never be formally recognized as magically binding. Or they can be actionable, made by our actions, as is the case in what we would call a life debt. But they can also be entirely intentional, as in the case of marriage vows, or in the case of honorable sworn vows." The classroom is again quiet, the void filled by the rough scratching of quills on parchment, and Tom lets his eyes brush over the class one more time before he asks broadly, "What can you tell me about unbreakable vows? An open question, anyone may answer." "They're unbreakable." Malfoy draws, and a few around him stifle their laughs. But while they laugh, Tom cannot help but scratch the itch to find Miss Granger once more. She is glaring. She is every bit as furious as he expected her to be, and it is marvelous. "Yes, Mr. Malfoy, they are unbreakable," he repeats, and it is with a great deal of effort that he tears his eyes from hers. "And Draco, if you would be so kind, what do you suppose would happen if you attempt to break an unbreakable vow?" Malfoy's smirk fades, but only slightly. "It's pretty obvious, isn't it, sir? You break one, you die." He grins at that. "To some, it might seem obvious, to others perhaps less so. But yes, you are again entirely correct. 5 points to Slytherin," he says before he circles back around his desk. "And with that, we have our next extended answer essay piece. I would like 3 feet of parchment on my desk by 4 p.m. on Monday of your own personal opinion on the potential benefits and limitations of an unbreakable vow, the situations in which one might use them, and of course, their dangers." There is a collective groan among the class, and she... He sees that her quill has snapped in her hand. "And for those of you who might not be clear on what I mean by personal opinion, that means that you are to write your own essays without the assistance of your classmates. This is an individual assignment, and Mr. Weasley, Mr. Potter, I am looking at you. If you feel the need to take your thoughts from Miss Granger yet again, you can be certain that I will know about it." There are low mumbles of "yes, sir," and "yes, Professor." "Wonderful. Then, if we are all clear, you are dismissed to use the rest of your allocated class time conducting your own research in the library," he finishes, but then quickly adds on. "Except for you, Miss Granger. I would very much appreciate it if you would stay behind for just a short moment." As his students scramble with their belongings and begin to scrape her from the classroom, he takes a seat at his desk. He remains patient as Granger is harassed by Weasley and Potter, surely being badgered about what she might have done to warrant what could only be a punishment. And while he waits, he draws a thin sheet of parchment from his top drawer and fills in the required information. By the time he's filled in the form, she is the only one left in the classroom, but she does not approach his desk. He looks up to find her still seated, and seeing her things still out on her table, he merely stares at her expectantly. They remain that way for a full minute, a battle of stubbornness, before Miss Granger actually growls. The sound sends a deep shiver down his spine. Then she loudly pushes her chair back, the legs scraping on the stone. She packs her things angrily, slamming her books into her bag, with far more force than is required, and when she finally approaches his desk, she does so with dragging feet. She stops opposite him and glares, arms crossed across her chest and eyes thin with anger. "Sir!" She eventually grounds out, and he's impressed that she managed even that much with her teeth so tightly clenched. He smiles warmly at her and hands her the sheet of parchment. "For last week, in the library," he says pleasantly. She looks at the paper in his hands as if she thinks it will burn her before she snatches it from him. When she reads it, he thinks that she, like her quill, is going to snap. By the coloring of her cheeks, the flaring of her nostrils, the twitching of her mouth, he thinks she will yell and tear the parchment into 100 of tiny pieces. He hopes she does. What a sight it would be. But no, not Miss Granger. Not the brilliant, extraordinary Miss Granger, and instead she gives him a forced and tightly controlled smile and says, "See you on Friday then, Professor." Tom leans back, and as he watches her leave, he loosens his toy. He watches each and every step. To be continued. Thank you for listening to Limerence by devdevlin, read by Bella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.